After a grueling day at work, I finally stepped into my garage. It wasn't just a space filled with tools and half-finished projects, it was my retreat, my escape from the daily grind. The hum of the overhead light, the lingering scent of motor oil, and the faint sound of metal clinking against my workbench always had a way of grounding me. Out here, nothing mattered except precision, patience, and the satisfaction of putting things together. Right in the middle of the garage sat my latest project, a 1974 Triumph Bonneville. I'd spent weeks working on it, carefully restoring each part, and I still had a long way to go. But I loved the process. Unlike my job, where chaos reigned and deadlines dictated my every move, this was simple. Here, everything followed a logical order. I grabbed a wrench and crouched down to tighten a bolt on the engine casing, losing myself in the task. Maybe 20 minutes had passed when I heard the creak of the door leading from the house. I didn't turn around immediately, but I knew who it was before she even spoke. Jessica had a presence I could always feel, even without seeing her. She stepped into the garage, a glass of wine in her hand, her perfume reaching me before her voice did. "Still at it, huh?" she said lightly. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the bike. She leaned against the workbench, setting her glass down, arms crossed as she watched me. There was a pause before she spoke again. "You know, you're really good at this. Probably the best mechanic I've ever seen." She smiled, but something about the way she said it felt calculated. It wasn't the compliment itself, it was the delivery. Too smooth, too practiced, as if she'd thought about how to phrase it before she even stepped into the garage. I glanced up at her briefly, returning her smile out of habit. "Thanks," I said simply, then went back to work. Normally, Jessica would pop in, check on me for a few minutes, maybe ask how things were going, and then head back inside. Tonight, though, she lingered. It was subtle, but I noticed. Then, casually, almost like an afterthought, she added, "Oh, I almost forgot to tell you, I'm going out with the girls tonight. Sarah's moving soon, and we figured we'd give her a proper send-off." She said it as if it wasn't a big deal, but her eyes flicked to me, watching for my reaction. I kept my expression neutral, giving her nothing. "All right," I said, twisting the wrench with measured precision. I didn't ask any questions. She knew I wasn't the type to pry. That was the thing about Jessica. She had a way of saying things at just the right moment, slipping them into conversation when she knew I was distracted. She'd mastered the art of timing, ensuring I was too preoccupied to dig deeper. By the time she left the garage, I had already pushed the interaction to the back of my mind. It was just a handful of small details, the way she stood, the tone of her voice, and the fact that she'd chosen this exact moment to mention her plans. I was good at reading people. Running a business had taught me that much. You learn to pick up on the little things, the things people don't realize they're giving away. About 30 minutes later, I heard her heels clicking across the hardwood floor as she made her way to the front door. I decided to step out of the garage and see her off. And that's when I noticed it. She was wearing a black dress that hugged her body in all the right places. Not overly formal, but definitely not something you'd throw on for a casual night out with friends. On her feet were a pair of new heels. I'd seen the box sitting in our closet just a few days ago, still unopened. And then there was her perfume. Different from her usual one. Sharper, more distinct. She caught my eye and smiled. "See you later," she said, leaning in for a quick kiss on the cheek. I nodded, keeping my face unreadable as I watched her walk out the door. A few moments later, her car started, and she was gone. I stood there for a second, an uneasy feeling settling in the back of my mind. Shaking it off, I headed back into the garage, picking up my wrench again. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't focus. Something about tonight felt off. Jessica was acting normal. Too normal. And that alone made me pay attention. After a while, I stepped outside to get some fresh air. The driveway was empty, as expected, but my eyes drifted toward the street. That's when I saw it. Down the road, just before disappearing around a corner, her car turned onto a street that didn't lead to downtown. It didn't lead to any of the restaurants or bars her friends usually went to either. Instead, it led to a part of town I recognized all too well. A neighborhood filled with upscale apartments and boutique shops. I didn't move. I just stood there, watching until her car was out of sight. There was no reason for her to take that route. Unless, of course, her plans weren't exactly what she'd told me. I walked back inside the garage and sat down on the stool near my workbench, staring at the motorcycle engine without really seeing it. Hours passed. Eventually, Jessica came home. She walked through the door with a bright smile, a small shopping bag in hand. "I brought back a little something," she said, pulling out a few tacky souvenirs. Magnets, keychains, the kind of thing you'd grab last minute to make it look like you actually went somewhere. She even showed me pictures on her phone. Her and her friends, sitting at a bar, drinks in hand, laughing and smiling. I nodded along as she talked, but my eyes caught something in the photos. The lighting. It didn't match the time she had left the house. A small detail. But I noticed. I didn't say anything. Not yet. Jessica was good at covering her tracks. Too good. And that, in itself, was suspicious. I watched her as she moved around the room, chatting away about her night like nothing was out of the ordinary. But something settled in my gut, a quiet certainty. She was trying too hard. Too perfect. And if there was one thing I knew for sure, it was that perfection was never natural. It was always hiding something. The next morning started just like any other. I woke up early, same as I always did, just as the first light of dawn crept through the blinds. After a quick shower, I headed downstairs, already mentally outlining my day, a few business calls, an order for motorcycle parts, and then back to the garage to continue working on the Bonneville. The smell of coffee filled the house by the time I walked into the kitchen. Jessica was already there, humming along to the music she had playing, moving effortlessly from the counter to the fridge. She had the same light, easygoing energy she always did in the mornings. Maybe even a little too easygoing. She poured herself a cup of coffee, twirling the mug in her hands as she danced slightly to the beat of the song playing. It was subtle, but I could tell she was putting on a show. I sat down at the table, watching her over the rim of my cup. She looked normal. Too normal. Her smile was natural, her movements fluid. But there was something about the way she avoided holding my gaze for too long that stood out. I didn't say anything. Just sipped my coffee and let her set the tone for the morning. After breakfast, I went about my day. I handled some client issues over the phone, placed my order for the bike parts, and spent the rest of the morning in the garage. Jessica floated in and out of the house, doing little things, tidying up, checking emails, making small talk. She didn't seem distracted, but at the same time, something about her was just off. I kept it to myself. No need to push. Not when I could observe instead. Around lunchtime, she came into the dining room while I was reviewing some paperwork. She leaned against the back of my chair, casual as ever, and said, "I need to head out later this afternoon. Emily called me last night. She needs help sorting through some documents for her divorce." Her voice was smooth. The excuse made sense. Emily, her cousin, was going through a nasty divorce, so on the surface, it wasn't unusual for Jessica to offer to help. But I caught it. The slight quickening in her speech. The way she rushed through the explanation, as if she wanted to get it out before I could ask any follow-ups. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. "If she needs help, then help her," I said simply. She smiled, a little too easily, and turned to leave the room. And then, almost as an afterthought, I added, "I've got some errands to run near her place. Want me to drop you off?" Her reaction was small, but I caught it. The slight hesitation. The brief flicker of something in her expression before she smoothed it over. Her smile came just a little too late. "Emily asked me to come by later," she said. "Her son's napping, and she doesn't want to disturb him." The response was quick, practiced. I let it go, nodding as she left the room. But inside, I was filing away the moment, like I always did. Later that afternoon, I noticed something else. Jessica was getting ready to leave, but she'd left her phone on the nightstand. She never left the house without her phone. A small detail, but one that didn't escape me. As I stepped into the room, the screen lit up with a new notification. A text from an unknown number. "Don't forget, 5 p.m. I didn't touch the phone. Didn't open the message. If I did, she might notice. Instead, I just stared at the screen for a moment, letting the information settle. 5 p.m. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Minutes later, Jessica left the house, dressed simply, her demeanor calm. I returned to the garage, pretending to be focused on my work, but my mind was already turning. A few hours later, she came back. This time, she was holding a stack of papers, actual documents, real copies with signatures. She showed them to me, walking me through how Emily was struggling, how she'd spent hours helping her sort through everything. Her voice was steady. Her explanation, flawless. She even looked genuinely concerned. But as she set her purse down by the door, I caught something. A faint metallic jingle. Keys. A small trinket. Not something she'd usually carry if she'd just been at Emily's. I didn't say a word. I just watched her. She was good. I had to give her that. Every word, every little detail matched her story perfectly. Too perfectly. But that was the thing about perfection. It was unnatural. It was a flaw in itself. After dinner, Jessica curled up on the couch, watching one of her favorite shows. I told her I had work to finish and headed to my office. Once I was alone, I pulled up the GPS tracking app linked to our vehicles. Jessica's car was connected to the system. It had been for years, set up for emergencies. It didn't take long to pull up her travel history for the day. Just as I expected, her route showed a stop at Emily's house. But she hadn't stayed long. After about 20 minutes, her car had crossed town, to a small boutique hotel. She was there for over an hour before heading home. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the screen. I wasn't angry. Not yet. What I felt was focus. Jessica thought she was being careful. She thought she had everything under control. She thought she was one step ahead. But she underestimated me. She always had. And that was going to be her biggest mistake. The next morning, I woke up with a plan. I went through my routine as usual, showered, made coffee, and skimmed through my work schedule for the day. Everything looked normal on the surface, just like Jessica did as she moved through the house, humming softly as she cleaned up the kitchen. But I wasn't fooled. I saw the cracks. The way she was trying just a little too hard to act like everything was fine. By mid-morning, I was back in the garage, organizing my tools and double-checking my list of adjustments for the bike. Jessica brought me a fresh cup of coffee, the way she always did, and lingered for a moment. Then, casually, she said, "I need to head out later. Emily asked me to pick up some documents from her lawyer. He couldn't get them to her on time, and she really needs them." Her tone was light. Too light. It was the second time in as many days that she'd used Emily as an excuse. I didn't react. Just tightened a bolt on the engine, my voice steady as I replied, "If she needs them, go help her." I didn't look up, but I could feel her watching me. Measuring my response. Checking for any sign that I was suspicious. I gave her none. She left the house a few hours later, dressed simply, carrying only her purse and keys. I waited until I was sure she was gone before making my move. I didn't follow her directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I pulled up the GPS tracker on her car. I watched as she drove out of town, following the route she'd claimed would take her to the lawyer's office. Halfway there, she veered sharply in a different direction. Not toward a law office. Not toward Emily's house. Toward a part of town that didn't match her story. I recognized the area immediately. High-end hotels, boutique shops, private conference centers. Not the kind of place you'd go to pick up legal paperwork. I didn't act right away. I let her believe she was in the clear. When I finally left the house, I drove calmly, taking my time. I parked a few blocks away from where her GPS route had ended, far enough to keep my car from being noticed. Then I waited. It didn't take long. Within minutes, a man stepped out of a nearby building. Tall, well-dressed, confident. The kind of guy who looked like he was used to being in control. He walked straight up to Jessica's car. They spoke for a few moments. She laughed, head tilted slightly, the way she always did when she was flirting. He handed her something through the open window. A folder, maybe an envelope. She checked the contents, nodded, and placed them on the passenger seat. Then she drove off. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. I had seen enough. I stayed in my car for a while, letting it sink in. I didn't recognize the guy, but the way they interacted told me everything I needed to know. They knew each other. Well, Their exchange had been too smooth, too comfortable to be a first-time meeting. I burned his face into my memory and noted the location before heading home. Jessica returned a couple of hours later. This time, she walked in carrying a folder of documents, setting them on the kitchen table as if they were the reason for her entire trip. "Got everything sorted," she said, her voice light, upbeat. I glanced at the folder, my expression unreadable. It looked official, all right. Paperwork stamped, signed, everything she needed to make her story seem airtight. But I caught something she didn't expect me to notice. A small logo in the corner. A financial institution's logo. Not a law office. I said nothing. Just tucked that detail away for later. Later that evening, as she lounged on the couch, scrolling through her phone, I moved through the house like nothing had changed. But I was already planning my next move. She thought she had me fooled. She didn't realize I was 3 steps ahead. That night, I barely slept. Every detail of the past few days replayed in my mind. Jessica's careful timing, her calculated words, the little things she thought I wouldn't notice. But I did. She was good at hiding things, but not perfect. And perfection is unnatural. It leaves cracks if you know where to look. I knew now that this wasn't just about an affair. There was something bigger happening. Something deliberate, planned. The way she avoided questions. The way she always had the perfect excuse ready before I even asked. The fake photos. The disguised paperwork. The mystery man. Jessica wasn't just sneaking around. She was orchestrating something. And I wasn't going to sit back and wait to find out what. The next morning, I woke up early, moving through my usual routine. I brewed my coffee, checked my emails, made it seem like just another normal day. Jessica acted the same way, too. A little too cheerful, humming as she moved around the kitchen, laughing at something on her phone. But I caught it. She glanced at me just a little too often. Like she was checking to see if I suspected something. I gave her nothing. By mid-morning, she slipped in another excuse. "I have to run out again. More documents for Emily's case. Shouldn't take too long." I nodded, pretending to barely listen. "All right. See you later." I didn't even look up. That's what she expected. But this time, I was ready. As soon as she left, I moved fast. I grabbed a small, discreet device from my desk, a keychain camera I'd bought a while back for an entirely different reason. I installed it in her car, tucked neatly out of sight. It would capture everything, where she went, who she talked to, what she said. Her phone was off-limits. Too risky. Jessica was careful with it, and if she noticed anything out of place, she'd change her routine. But her car. That was her blind spot. By the time she got back, she had no idea that I had just turned her own vehicle into my personal surveillance system. That afternoon, as she showered, I pulled up the live feed from my laptop. At first, nothing interesting. Just her driving, humming along to the radio, tapping her fingers against the steering wheel. Then, her phone rang. She answered on speaker. And I heard his voice. "So, are you ready for the big day?" Jessica laughed. Not the polite laugh she gave acquaintances. Not the fake one she used in small talk. This was different. Warm. Familiar. Comfortable. A laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. "Of course I'm ready," she said. "You know me. I always finish what I start. This is going to be huge." I stiffened. The guy chuckled. "You sure? This isn't just some little stunt. We're talking about breaking a record that no one else has even come close to. 1,000 men in one day. That's not ambition, Jess. That's insanity." I froze. My mind refused to process what I had just heard. 1,000 men? A record? This had to be a joke. Some kind of misunderstanding. But the way they spoke, the ease of their conversation, the certainty in her voice. This wasn't a joke. Not at all. Jessica knew exactly what she was doing. And she was proud of it. "I know it sounds crazy," she admitted, her tone almost smug. "But this is my moment. They'll remember me forever. It's not just a goal. It's my legacy." Legacy. The word made my stomach turn. The man's voice lowered slightly. "You've taken care of the venue, right? We need to keep this discreet." No one can know. Discreet. Jessica was planning something big. Something she didn't want anyone to find out about. And I was sitting there, watching it all unfold in real time. I turned off the feed, my hands gripping the edge of my desk. I wasn't just dealing with a cheater. Jessica was playing a whole different game. And if she thought she had control, she was dead wrong. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, my mind racing to catch up with what I had just heard. 1,000 men in one day. A record. A legacy. Jessica wasn't just sneaking around. She was planning something huge. Something sick. And she had no idea that I was watching it all unfold. I took a deep breath, forcing my hands to steady. Reacting now would be a mistake. If I confronted her too soon, she'd spin the story, gaslight me, twist things in her favor. Jessica was too smart for a direct confrontation. She'd find a way to slip through my fingers. No. I needed proof. Cold, undeniable evidence. I spent the next few hours piecing together everything I had so far. The GPS logs, multiple trips to a private club, far from anywhere she should have been. The mystery man, someone she clearly knew well, trusted, and was working with. The fake alibis, flawless on the surface, but riddled with inconsistencies once I dug deeper. The secret meeting location, a high-end venue, discreet and exclusive. The phone call, the final nail in the coffin. The one thing that proved she wasn't just having an affair. She was orchestrating something far worse. By now, I knew when it was happening. Saturday. That gave me 3 days. 3 days to figure out where exactly this was taking place. 3 days to put together a plan. Jessica had spent all this time thinking she was in control. She believed she was outsmarting me, playing me like a fool while she moved her pieces into place. She had no idea that I had already flipped the board. That night, I barely spoke to her. I let her run through her usual routine, scrolling through her phone, sipping wine, acting like the perfect wife. I played my part too. Casual. Indifferent. Like nothing was out of the ordinary. But the entire time, I was watching her. Memorizing her movements. Listening for the lies. Calculating my next move. She went to bed early. Probably exhausted from all the planning. I stayed up, waiting until I was sure she was asleep before making my move. I needed to know exactly where this was going down. And I knew just where to look. Jessica wasn't stupid. She wouldn't leave an obvious paper trail. But her phone, that was a different story. She guarded it during the day, but at night? When she was fast asleep. It was right there, sitting on the nightstand. I moved carefully, picking it up and turning it just enough to see the screen light up. Her calendar was open. And there it was. Saturday. Event. Private location. No details. No address. But it was something. I needed more. I checked her messages, careful not to open anything directly. One name stood out. Ryan. I scrolled through their chat. The latest message from him. Everything is locked in. See you Saturday at 7. A few messages above that, I spotted what I was looking for. An address. I took a photo of the screen, then set her phone back exactly as it was. I exhaled slowly. Now I had everything I needed. The time. The place. The proof. Jessica thought she had built a perfect lie. She had no idea that I was about to burn it all to the ground. Saturday arrived faster than I expected. Jessica had no idea what was coming. I watched her move through the house that morning, sipping her coffee, scrolling through her phone, acting like everything was normal. Like she wasn't about to walk straight into a trap. She thought she was untouchable. That she had played her cards so perfectly, I'd never see it coming. She had no idea I held the winning hand. By the time she left the house that evening, dressed in a sleek black dress, hair and makeup perfectly done, I was already in motion. I waited 10 minutes before leaving myself, making sure she had a head start. The address I had pulled from her phone led me to an upscale club, one of those places that looked low profile from the outside but catered to people with money, power, and no morals. I parked a block away, close enough to keep an eye on things without drawing attention. The entrance was discreet. No flashing signs, no neon lights, just a single guarded door. Men in suits filtered in one by one, each greeted by a clipboard-wielding bouncer. I needed to get inside. I wasn't dressed for a club, but I knew places like this. Money talked. I walked up to the entrance, casual but confident, slipping a folded bill into the bouncer's hand. Name's Ryan. Should be on the list. He barely glanced at the clipboard before pocketing the cash and stepping aside. I was in. The interior was dimly lit, sleek, and expensive. Leather seats, dark wood, private booths. The kind of place that made you feel like secrets were currency. Men lounged around, sipping high-end liquor while barely dressed women drifted between them, offering drinks, company, and more. This wasn't just a club. This was a marketplace. And Jessica was right at the center of it. She sat on a plush velvet sofa in one of the private lounges, surrounded by men. Smiling. Laughing. Like she owned the damn place. Like she wasn't married. Like the last 10 years of our lives had meant nothing. I clenched my jaw, but I didn't react. Not yet. I needed more. I positioned myself where my hidden camera could capture everything. I watched as Jessica leaned in toward a well-dressed man, Ryan, the one from the messages. He handed her an envelope. She opened it, glancing at whatever was inside, then nodded approvingly. She wasn't just participating in this event, she was organizing it. I had more than enough proof now. But I wasn't done yet. I slipped out of the lounge unnoticed, weaving through the crowd until I reached the far end of the club. That's where I saw it, the fire alarm. Perfect. I pulled it. The blaring siren shattered the atmosphere instantly. Chaos erupted. Drinks spilled, people panicked, security scrambled to regain control. Jessica shot to her feet, eyes darting around in confusion. I stood right in her line of sight. For the first time in years, she looked afraid. I let it sink in. Then I turned and walked out, disappearing into the night. By the time I got home, I had already sent everything, the GPS logs, the photos, the hidden camera footage, to my lawyer. Jessica didn't come home that night. When she finally showed up the next morning, disheveled and exhausted, she tried to act like nothing had happened. I was sitting at the kitchen table, waiting. I slid a single envelope across to her. She stared at it, confused. Then she opened it. Divorce papers. Her face drained of color. What is this? It's over, Jessica. My voice was calm. I know everything. She opened her mouth, probably to lie, to manipulate, to find some way to twist the truth. I cut her off. Save it. I have proof. I've already filed. And trust me, you're walking away with nothing. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. For the first time, she had no control over the situation. For the first time, she had lost. She tried to fight it, dragged it through court, played the victim. But the evidence was airtight. By the time the divorce was finalized, I had everything: the house, the money, the car. Jessica. She had nothing. The club shut down after the investigation. Ryan and his associates were caught up in fraud and trafficking charges. Jessica's name was dragged into it, too. Last I heard, she was barely scraping by, living in a cheap apartment, trying to outrun her own reputation. I didn't bother keeping track. I had my life back. Free from her lies. Free from the woman who thought she could play me. She thought she was writing the story. She didn't realize I had rewritten the ending. And this time, I won. Thank you for visited my YouTube channel. Your support, likes, and comments truly inspire me to create even more engaging content. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. You're a part of this amazing community, and I'm thrilled to share my stories with you. See you in the next video on YouTube.